As we start. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from around the world. My name is Dr. Priyanka Singh, and I'm a scientist within the NCD program at FIND, based here in Geneva. On behalf of FIND, the Institute for Diabetes Technology in Germany, the SA Diabetes Advocacy, and SEMSA, the Society for Endocrinology, Metabolism, and Diabetes of South Africa, I want to warmly welcome you to this important webinar, Making Sense of CGM Accuracy, and where we are going to launch our CGM performance fact sheet. Why are we here today? So we want to specify on the fact that accuracy in CGM is more than just a number, and that clinical decisions, patient safety, and trust in technology is very important. And so with more devices coming into the market, providers and patients need clear and independent guidance. So today marks the official launch of the CGM performance fact sheet, which has also been endorsed by SEMSA in South Africa. This fact sheet is designed to simplify complex performance data, making it actionable for clinicians, people living with diabetes, researchers, and policy stakeholders. So if we move to the agenda, the next slide. Just some housekeeping rules. So we'll be starting, but in the meantime, if you could please share your name, your organization, where are you joining us from in the chat, in the YouTube chat, in the live YouTube chat that you can see. And also, we will be having a Q&A towards the end of the webinar, so you can also post your questions in the chat. So here's how our 90 minutes will be going together. So we will start with a brief introduction of why CGM accuracy matters, both from a clinical and patient perspectives. We'll also have a technical overview of the CGM performance standards and methods of evaluation. We'll be officially launching the fact sheet and walking you through the different structure and the practical applications. And after that, we have an incredible panel here with our experts, where we'll have a panel discussion talking about the diverse perspectives from research, clinical care, and advocacy. And then we'll open the floor for audience Q&A. So please do add your questions in the chat box at any time. Finally, wrapping up with some key takeaways. So starting with our first, why CGM accuracy matters. I'll start with our speakers, Kirsten and Dr. Gamans. So I'd like to introduce Kirsten. So Kirsten de Klerk is the co-founder of SA Diabetes Advocacy and a young leader in diabetes for the International Diabetes Federation. Kirsten is dedicated to creating a better life for people living with diabetes in South Africa and has a passion for working towards equal access to healthcare. Over to you, Kirsten.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Priyanka. I just want to confirm that everyone can hear me. Good. Wonderful. Good morning, everyone.
Kirsten, if you could, we can't hear her.
You can't hear me.
We can't hear you. If you could increase the volume.
My audio is...
Can hear you clearly.
Wrapping up with some key takeaways.
Okay, so everyone else can hear me clearly. That's good. Wonderful.
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead. Thank you. So this morning, I'm going to be speaking about why continuous glucose monitoring accuracy actually matters and why are we having this conversation today. So right now, I'm sure that we're all aware that technology is moving faster than regulation and faster than the fact that guidelines are even being put together, and sometimes even faster than our own ability to understand how all of these devices work. And I think as we see more continuous glucose monitoring devices into the market, we're also seeing that they're trying to differentiate and bringing new features. So we really are struggling to keep up with the increase in innovation when it comes to CGM technology. So when we look at continuous glucose monitors, they were designed specifically as medical devices to help people living with diabetes to manage their condition safely safely and effectively. But increasingly, these devices are now being marketed to the general public as wellness tools. And I think this kind of first flagged a kind of red flag for me, because this shift alone really raised important questions around safety, accuracy, and accountability when it comes to these devices in the market. So over the last couple of years in the South African context, we have started to welcome the idea of more affordable alternatives to the very costly continuous glucose monitoring devices that are available. But it quickly became a concern to us, especially as community members, as people living with diabetes and carers of those that have children living with diabetes, that some devices are not as accurate as others. And that's when the community really began to realize that not all CGM devices are created equally. A lot of people assume that if a medical device is available for purchase, that it has been correctly tested and approved for use. And unfortunately, that's not the case. I have unfortunately had community members sharing stories of life-threatening situations because of inaccurate readings. I had a mother of a young son who shared how her son had gone into diabetic ketoacidosis from an inaccurate device, and how she received no support from the manufacturer, and how she was almost made to feel as though it was her fault and that it had nothing to do with the device. I've also, from a healthcare professional perspective, I've really witnessed the struggle and the conversation around not knowing which devices to trust when prescribing to their patients. There's kind of a concern around, is the accuracy component of a continuous glucose monitor important, or is anything better than finger pricking, especially in a South African context when we have no access? Is it possible to purely rely on the trends of a less accurate device when prescribing to patients? So all of these sort of concerns have started coming up in the South African context. And then on top of that, we have made quite a few strides in CGM funding access, particularly in the private healthcare sector in South Africa. And we're now seeing that many private healthcare schemes are not aware of the implications of funding a CGM device that is not accurate to their members. So, for instance, there was a device that recently entered the market, specifically targeted to people living with type 1 diabetes. And on closer inspection and looking at the study that they had not published, actually, the device had only been tested on 17 people living with type 1 diabetes before it was launched into the market. So that was a shock to the system. And another device that was launched reported, and I know that we're not putting all the context on MARD, I'm sure that will be explained a bit later, but another device reported a MARD that was 21.9%, which is worse than some of the CGM sensors from more than 15 years ago. So we're really seeing such a range in accuracy when it comes to CGM devices, and again, no regulation. So as all these kind of question marks are coming to mind, today's session is really about creating clarity in all that confusion while we wait for something like ISO standards to be confirmed in the space. So it's really about empowering every person in the CGM space. So whether you're a caregiver of a child living with diabetes, a healthcare professional who's prescribing CGM devices, a person living with diabetes, or a funder of this device, it's really about asking the right questions, knowing which questions to ask, and to understand what accuracy really means, and then to make the best informed decision for yourself when it comes to the information that you collect. We really do believe as SA Diabetes Advocacy that every person living with diabetes has the right to choose any medication or device or technology that they feel is right for them. Our role really is not to take away the choices that are out there, but just to make sure that when someone chooses, that they do this fully informed. So we encourage anyone that does try new sensors to really do it in a cautious way. So we often try and get people to double check against using a trusted device alongside a new device, or to finger prick test alongside a new device, especially when glucose levels seem to be unusually high or low, to prevent any dangerous situations. And then just to end on a really positive note here, this is really not about discouraging new devices. If anything, we know that innovation is essential. We know that competition drives affordability and access, and innovation should just really never come at the expense of safety, especially for those end users of the device. So I hope that, together we can work together. This isn't about blaming. This isn't about pointing fingers. It's really a collaborative approach where we can all work together to provide accurate devices to the end user. And I think if I could just leave one last note, especially to device manufacturers, it's just to say to remember the end user. It's not just an end user, it's a parent making life or death decisions every single day for their child. It's a person living with diabetes using this device to make decisions every single minute of every single day. So I'd just like to say that, again, you don't have to do this alone. We want to work with you. We want to make these devices better and more accessible and affordable for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. That was incredible. And thank you, Sherman, for all the perspectives. And indeed, we don't want to stop innovation and we want the devices to be there and people making informed decisions about it. And this is why we have this. So we want Dr. Gaman now to come in from the more clinical and clinician perspective on why does CGM accuracy really matter. Over to you, Dr. Gaman.
Thank you, Priyanka. Am I audible? Am I clear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. So, yeah, it's nice to say good morning from Nairobi, good afternoon and good evening to wherever you are. It's a pleasure, and I must thank everyone for joining us, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me here today. So I wear two hats. I've been using CGMs for about 18 years or so, and also I'm a clinician. I'm bringing the patient's perspective in terms of accuracy with CGM. So next slide, please. So this is where we came from, and this is for you, for the first people who haven't seen a CGM. That was our first CGMs that we ever used, and we've come a long way. Next slide, please. Back, please. Yeah, thank you. So if we look at where we've come from and in terms of monitoring of diabetes. In the 80s, 70s, we did use urine testing for those of you who were there using Benedict solution or later on clean test tablets. And this really gave us retrospective, if you really looked at it, inaccurate or data that was not useful because it was talking about what your sugars were a few hours ago, but that's what we have. Over the years, we got better machines, that probably were not accurate because there were so many challenges. Then came into our first CGMs that would last 3 days. And as Kristen made an amount of about, or inaccuracies of about 29% or so, if you want to look at it from that perspective. So we've come a long way, but why is accuracy important? Next slide, please. Really, it matters to patients because they rely purely on it, on making their decisions. What they eat, how much insulin they will give, whether they'll hold back from eating. And remember, when you don't have accurate CGM data, you don't have patient satisfaction. The patient doesn't feel engaged. They feel distressed, and you can't optimize therapy. Next slide, please. So really, on a day-to-day basis, CGM impacts us all who use it, and even the caregivers and the doctors. For example, patients will look at a CGM and say, "Can I eat this meal? Can I snack? How much insulin do I take? Do I hold back? Can I exercise? The timing of the exercise, the intensity of the exercise." Um, you need real-time data that is accurate to do this. If the data is not accurate, you'll have person maybe overcorrecting prior to an exercise or reducing the activity. And this really creates a sense of insecurity. It creates a sense of stress, distrust. And we know the essence is really to mold diabetes around the patient, not the patient around diabetes. So whatever we are doing, are we looking at the patient and how it can help the patient deal with a condition that requires you to think through each and everything you're doing. As I mentioned, bolus adjustment, basal adjustments, insulin adjustment to avoid, this all reads accurate data. When we come to the relationship between a doctor and a patient, CGM empowers shared decision making that strengthens trust and adherence. If, for example, you have inaccurate CGM data, then the patient doubts whether the doctor's recommendations are right, or the doctor may doubt whether the patient is actually following, or may second guess their treatments and ask, did I do the right thing? So here, accuracy is really, really, really critical. And of course, when you're changing strategies, when you're looking at long term, how to change, how to intensify therapy, or introducing a new agent, you need accurate data. Next slide, please. So in our daily routines, or in patients' daily routines, as I mentioned, you want to mold diabetes around the patient, not them. Things like spontaneity, to eat out, to exercise, to travel, all these need someone to have accurate data. In school, at work, when you have unstable data, or stability in glucose control, in sugar control, you probably have better concentration, productivity, and safety. And of course, you want to know that your alarm is safe, is accurate, trusted. If you don't have a trusted alarm, you may have a severe hypo and not know it. And all the mothers know what happens with a false alarm at night, how it creates tension, anxiety to not only the patient, but also the caregivers. Remember, we're all looking at quality of life. And if we have a CGM that you have to finger prick to double check, or each time you have a reading, you're not comfortable, then where have we removed, or where have we helped the patients? So really, you want to create a sense of freedom and not worry in our CGMs. And this is where accuracy is important. Next. So what we know is, really, patients don't care about what the MAD is. They really want to know, does this reading make sense in my life? Am I actually low? Am I actually high? Is it something I can trust? Next slide. And just a brief takeaway as we end up, really, our patients are our center of care, and really, accuracy is a personal thing, to be honest. It influences safety, emotions, quality of life, and I think it must remain central in evaluating CGM performance. The accuracy and the patient's perception that I'm safe, I'm comfortable, I can trust this to look after myself, to make decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gaman. Indeed, accuracy is a personal thing, and it really brings that influence on the quality of life, indeed. So moving on from that accuracy that we know is so important and so critical, I would like to now go on to the more importance, like if accuracy is so important, are CGMs actually being, developed with that level of accuracy? And to bring in that more technical perspective, we will move to the more technical side where Dr. Stefan would be presenting. And just to briefly introduce Dr. Stefan Plus. So Stefan is the head of the glucose monitoring at the Institute of Diabetes Technology in Ulm, Germany, where he has gained more than 15 years of experience in clinical trials about the accuracy of CGMs and SMBG, or self-monitoring blood glucose systems. And for the last 5 years, he has been a member of the Commission for Laboratory Diagnostics of the German Diabetes Association and the German Society for Clinical Chemistry and Laboratory Medicine. For several years, he has been part of the working group on CGM of the International Federation of Clinical Chemistry and Laboratory Medicine, which he chairs since January 2025. So I would like to hand over to Dr. Stefan, if you can take over now.
Yes, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and I'm very delighted to be here and talk with you about a technical overview over CGM performance and how to make sense and understand CGM performance. Next slide, please. These are my conflicts of interest. I'm an employee at the IFDT, where we conduct these clinical trials for different manufacturers. and where I also gained all of my experience regarding CGM systems. And I'm the current chair of the working group on CGM of the IFCC, as Priyanka already said in the introduction. And the second point is also what shaped my personal opinion of CGM systems to a large degree. Next slide, please. This is the outline of my presentation. At first, I want to talk a little bit about CGM performance parameters and what they mean. There are two common parameters, MARD and agreement rates, that I will go into detail. Then I will talk about the FDA iCGM special controls, which are basically a CGM standard in the United States of America. And last but not least, I will introduce a guideline proposal that we in the working group on CGM of the IFCC have created. This working group is a multinational working group with experts from healthcare, from laboratory medicine, and also from scientific researchers. Next slide, please. The MARD is basically the most or the best known performance parameter for CGM system. It's the mean absolute relative difference, and basically you compare CGM data to blood glucose measurements that you say, okay, these are the true values, the reference values. And then the MARD is calculated as the average percent difference between a blood glucose measurement and the corresponding CGM reading. And very simplified, it is the average error, measurement error of your CGM system. Next slide, please. Over the years, MARD values have been published. And as you can see on the left-hand side, the results published in this case, FDA approval documents. FDA is the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. The MARD results get lower and lower with each year. But this raises the question, how comparable are MARD results or any accuracy results from one study to the next? Click, please. Sorry, yeah, thank you. What we found out in the working group on CGM, we did a review of more than 120 CGM performance studies performed between 2002 and 2022. And what we found is that there is not only one accuracy result. Shown here are studies with Freestyle Libre 1, not because it's a particularly market result, but just it was the device with the most studies in our review. You can see that the MARD result varies between 10% and 18%. Despite it being the same device, having the same level of actual performance that you would experience in real life. And that means that the study procedures that are implemented in the studies to show this level of CGM performance, they have an impact on what you see in that specific study. So one thing we identified is that acceptance criteria, basically saying if you want to say an MARD below 10 is necessary to safely dose insulin, then you always have to couple an acceptance criterion with appropriate study procedures. And I will go into detail on that a bit later on as well. Next slide, please. So this variability from study to study also raises the question of how meaningful MARDs published by manufacturers are. In this example here, the Libre 2 had a reported MARD of 9.2% against venous comparator measurements, and the GlucoRx IDEX had 9.1 and 10.1%, depending on whether you used venous or capillary comparators. I will also talk about that difference later on. Click please for the animation. We did a manufacturer independent study at our institute, which was sponsored by FIND, where we could reproduce the accuracy result for the Libre 2, but not for the ADEX. And that's where the 21.9% came from, which is a big issue because, as I said, the study procedures can have an impact on the accuracy that you see in a study. And apparently, or at least it seems that way, that the study that was done by the manufacturer of the GlucoRx 8X was not as representative of people with type 1 diabetes using a CGM system than our study that we did for FIND was. Next slide, please. The same is basically true for all accuracy measures that you can think of. Also for the agreement rate, the agreement rate is well, it's not a new parameter, but it has gained in relevance. You still compare CGM data to blood glucose measurements, and the agreement rate tells you how many value pairs are within a specific deviation of each other. So while the MARD, as I said earlier, tells you the average measurement error, the agreement rate tells you, for example, 90% of data points are within a specific distance from the glucose comparator values, the reference values, and if these deviation limits are selected based on clinical relevance, then you could, for example, say 90% of my values will not have a clinically relevant deviation from the blood glucose measurements. As a metaphor, maybe. If you wanted to cross a river by foot, walking through a river, the MRD would tell you that, for example, the average the average depth of the river is 1 meter, and that's good to know. But you don't know which part of the river maybe has only 10 centimeters depth, and which part maybe is 2 meters or more deep. And so the agreement rate tells you, okay, for 90% of the river crossing, I will have a depth of no more than 1.5 meters, for example, and maybe the remaining 10% I can manage, in this case, by swimming. Next slide, please. The agreement rates then also bring me to the FDA iCGM special controls. These were introduced in the United States in 2018. Next slide, please. With the express goal of establishing a simplified regulatory pathway for CGM systems that are intended to be integrated or interoperable with other medical devices like insulin pumps. And the FDA also abandoned the concept of MARD in this approval and went to the agreement rates. If you could click, please, for the animation. Because they rightly reasoned that you don't want to know your average measurement error. You want to know how many of your results in the low and high glycemic ranges and in the target range are within a specific clinically relevant difference from the comparator results. And the FDA iCGM requirements, that's not only one criterion, it's a set of 11 accuracy criteria that have to be fulfilled at the same time. So it's much more strict than what was done before. And they were established in 2018, and for that point in time, they were the best set of accuracy requirements that were available at the time. Next slide, please. The iCGM special controls want to make sure that a CGM system that is used and that is approved under that pathway allows safe therapy. To that end, the study must represent the intended use population and cover the measuring range of the device, because these are topics that can impact the perceived accuracy within a clinical study. The performance must be consistent throughout the sensor wear period. Then these 11 performance criteria have to be fulfilled. The CGM data transmission must be reliable, and features like alerts must be reliable, and you have to show all of that with data from the study. And to make that more easily understood, maybe, please go to the next slide. think about what if your CGM system was a car. You want your car to be a safe mode of transport. And anyone with a driver's license must be able to drive the car safely at all possible speeds. You want to make sure that your car is equally safe when it's new and when it's older. You want to make sure that there are no major breakdowns. Of course, there will be breakdowns as there will be gaps in data, CGM data transmission, but you want to minimize the risk of these breakdowns, and any features of your car still must be reliable. Please go to the next slide. What the FDA basically asks is, with regard to the study procedures, you have to represent the intended use population and cover the measuring range. Like with the car, you have to test it at 30 kph and at 400 kph if your car can do that. An issue we identified in the working group with these FDA requirements was that they didn't specify where you have to check this. And basically, in an FDA iCGM study, it's similar to testing your road only on straight asphalt roads. And that brings me to the proposal that we have from the IFCC working group. Next slide, please. Because we identified this and other topics as possible gaps that we want to close when looking at CGM performance, because we know, like I said earlier, that these study procedures, the conditions under which CGM systems are tested, can affect the perceived level of performance in a study. Next slide, please. So instead of only looking at can your car drive safely at 30 and 400 kph, you must also look at, is it safe when you are on a curvy road? If you are driving on loose surface, is it still a controllable environment within your car? And that's the same case with CGM systems. You do not only want to know, do they represent my hypoglycemic values accurately and my hyperglycemic values? You also want to know, does my CGM system capture rapid rates of change accurately? And that is also something that we identified as one of the biggest challenges with CGM systems. There are some CGM systems that are unable to cope with the rapid rates of change. We had a few years ago, we did a study for a manufacturer, and their CGM system had a lag time of 15 minutes. And with 15 minutes lag time, any rapid glucose rates of change are basically not trackable. Next slide, please. So to ensure that this loose surface curvy road is addressed appropriately in CGM performance studies, we from the working group on CGM said, okay, let's establish a target glucose profile where we make sure that we do not only look at the high and the low glucose values, but also at situations where there is an impending hyperglycemia and impending hypoglycemia, called alert high and low in this graph, where you also want your CGM system to be very accurate, to be reliably warned, alarmed before you have a glycemic excursion. And we through the working group, we were able to create a glucose manipulation procedure for clinical studies. If you click for the animation, please, where it's possible to achieve that despite or while still ensuring participant safety. The details are not that important right now, but the important thing is all clinically relevant situations are covered here, whereas they are not necessarily covered in other studies, including studies to get FDA iCGM approval. And that's not to say that any current CGM system is unsafe. We know they are safe, and you can do safe therapy with them, but it could be better. That's the main point. Next slide, please. This is a very technical slide. You don't have to understand all the details. It's just there for if you want to look at the live stream or at the recording later on. We know, I said that earlier, that some manufacturers compare their CGM systems against capillary BG values and others against venous BG values. But there are on average 5% difference between the two. And especially after meals, it can be more than 20% difference. And that basically means that when you have a CGM system that tries to mimic capillary glucose values and one that tries to mimic venous glucose values, the readings from these systems will be on average 5% different, although they should represent the same glycemic situation in a specific person. And another aspect of that topic with comparator values is that different comparator analyzers, lab analyzers, have been shown to measure systematically differently from each other, both between different brands of analyzers where you might expect that, but also within the same brand of analyzer. And that's also in the range of 5 to 8%. So we need to standardize the comparator sample and measurement method in CGM studies if we want to make sure that CGM systems show comparable results. Next slide, please. We know that the current regulations do not ensure similar readings from one system to the next, because we did a study last year with 3 different CGM systems. These are the orange, green, and blue continuous lines. We also used 3 different comparator methods. These are the symbols connected by dashed lines. And as you can see, the 3 systems, these are all FDA-approved systems and CE-marked systems. One of the 3 systems showed markedly discrepant CGM readings as in comparison to the others. And from the clinical relevance, the GMI, the glucose management indicator, was nearly 0.5% different between the blue CGM system and the other 2. And the time and tide range, which is more and more often discussed as a primary clinical endpoint, was 13% different between these systems. And that is just something that it might not be a huge problem in the daily life of people with diabetes. But if you want to use CGM systems in clinical outcome studies to assess the efficacy of new drugs and medications, or if you want to use CGM systems in the future for diabetes diagnosis, then these differences are very important. And that's why what was a great innovation in 2018, the FDA iCGM special controls, might not be sufficient now. Next slide, please. We also looked specifically at the performance of the Freestyle Libre 3 system that we tested in that study and compared that to the manufacturer-initiated study, just to see how, like I said, study procedures can affect the perceived performance in a study, just to get a feeling for how large these differences are. As you can see on the bottom, the MARD result was below 8% in the Abbott study, and in our study it was 10 to 12%, depending on which comparator was used. And similar discrepancies were found for the agreement rate. And that basically comes down to, if you click for the animation, please. It comes down to the study design. We challenged the CGM systems more, and we used also capillary results, because that is something that people with diabetes have to use when their CGM system isn't available for some kind, or if their symptoms don't fit the CGM readings. A major drawback of our study was that it was only 24 participants, which is not really that many. Abbott did 100 participants in their study, and the number of participants is also something that is very important to look at in these studies. But unfortunately, manufacturer-independent studies suffer from small sample sizes because of limited funding. Next slide, please. So with our working group guideline proposal, we want to harmonize the CGM readings from system to system. We want to make sure that the CGM systems are sufficiently challenged to recreate all clinically relevant real-life use scenarios in such a study. And that is also something that when you want to interpret the performance results of a clinical trial, that you have to look at. You have to make sure that there's a sufficiently large number of people that were enrolled in the study. You have to look at, is it the right population? Kirsten also said something about that. You want to make sure that the system was all actually tested in people with type 1 diabetes. And you want to make sure that the system was adequately challenged, that you have the measuring range covered, and that you have rapid rates of change. This guideline proposal, we want to submit it for publication later this year. But the ultimate goal is to get a CGM performance standard established through the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. If you click for the animation, please. Unfortunately, ISO standards take a lot of time, usually between the creation of the project team and the establishment and publishing of the ISO standard. That can be 3 to 5 years. And that's why we want to get our proposal out sooner rather than later, so that maybe we can convince people that it's actually a good idea to look into more detail than what is currently done. And with that, I'm at the end of my presentation. Next slide, please. I want to specifically thank the IFCC working group and the members who have for their sustained efforts and contributions to all the work we do. Without them, our working group proposal would not have been possible. And I want to thank my colleagues from the IFDT and the Diabetes Center Bern for their financial support in our IFCC working group endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan, for that rich technical description. And I loved that amazing comparison that you made around CGMs and cars and how important it is and how simplified you've made it for us to understand that as well. And this is the reason why we have this fact sheet. And while we are waiting for the guidelines proposal, which we look forward to launching this year, as you mentioned, and the ISO standard subsequently in a couple of years, we want to launch the CGM performance fact sheet, which actually will provide that evidence-based information for patients, for people living with diabetes, for healthcare providers. Next slide, please. So with this session, we'll just jump right into what is the objective of this fact sheet. So this fact sheet was developed in collaboration with IFDT and SA Diabetes Advocacy in South Africa to understand, to give a tool to understand the performance data of a CGM product from the package inserts and other information sources, and also to support the people, the patients, the people living with diabetes and the healthcare providers in making an informed decision on selecting the right product for you. Next slide. So in all, it's not a very long document. It is a few pages. And this is one of the critical parts of the document, wherein we have a CGM confidence check. In a sense, this is basically consists of 6 essential elements or topics that we want to cover. So if you go to the next animation. There are 6 essential topics and pertaining questions. So we have the study population and the number of people in the study, the sensor and comparator measurements, the glucose data distribution, and meal and insulin challenges, and the study publication. So these are the 6 elements, and we have the pertaining questions, what we need to check for in each of these questions, in each of these elements from a product IFU, the instructions for use, and why does each of these elements matter? We will go in detail within this. And Kirsten, I'm looking at you. We will be going in detail for each of these. Just to give a brief snapshot also, that we have a glossary which will explain some very technical terms in a very simple language and abbreviations to explain some of the abbreviations that are used in this fact sheet. And we also have references that you can refer to if you are interested for more information. Next slide. I'll hand it over to Kirsten to go over some of the essential questions. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Priyanka. So I'm just going to be taking you through some of the 6 essential questions that are asked. Just as a disclaimer, I am a person living with type 1 diabetes, so this is very overwhelming in terms of, when you're looking at a study, if you're not working in the space, or, if you're not a doctor or a scientist or used to looking at these sort of studies, it can be very overwhelming. So what I did personally is I took some of the studies that were sent to me by device manufacturers in the South African market, and I uploaded these sources onto a wonderful tool called Notebook LM, which basically helps users understand, summarize, and interact with complex information. So it gives you references to the resources that you upload yourself. And then I also used sources that were publicly available on medical journals. So just for, in terms of the examples that I'm going to list below, it's by no means saying that the devices are inaccurate. I've left names out just to keep the peace while I go through this, but all of this information is available online. And I think what we really want to push for here is that we have a right as funders, doctors, people living with diabetes to query more information when it's not clear from the studies that are presented or the information that's given to us from manufacturers. So just going into the first question on the CGM confidence checklist, it's around how many people were in the study population that had type 1 diabetes. So here you really want to look for the checkers that less than 75% of people either had type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes, or did not have diabetes at all. So on the left-hand side, one of the studies showed that 100% of the study participants live with type 1 diabetes or had type 2 diabetes and were on insulin therapy. So that's a really important indicator to make there that they are insulin dependent. So that study would get a tick from me in terms of confidence check. And then on the right-hand side, a separate study which enrolled 72 subjects, only 17%, so 23.61% were people living with type 1 diabetes. And if you look at the type 2 diabetes population, which was around 76.39%, it did not classify whether these people were insulin dependent or not. So here it would raise a little bit of a concern for me as a person living with diabetes. But again, you can always inquire with the manufacturer for more information if that doesn't give you clarity in the study. On to the next slide, please. The second question in our 6-question confidence check is how many people participated in the manufacturer-sponsored study. So here you want at least 50 people who have type 1 diabetes or are insulin dependent to be part of the study. In the top left-hand side, 75% of the study participants lived with type 1 diabetes and were insulin dependent, so it was definitely classified within the study. So that for me had a confidence check in terms of a tick. And then on the right-hand side, similar to the study above, where 72 subjects were enrolled in the study, only 17 study participants were actually confirmed to be insulin dependent. So again, I would inquire there from the manufacturer for more detail on the people living with type 2 diabetes and how many of them were insulin dependent. On to the next slide, please. Our third question is how long did participants wear the sensor, and were the sensor readings measured against blood glucose or other CGM readings during the entire lifetime of the sensor? So it's important to note that these sensors didn't fall off before the time that they actually are in use for the full sensor wear period. So on the left-hand side, there was a study in which the participants wore the sensor for its entire allowed wear time, which was 10.5 days. And the sensors were not removed before the entire allowed wear time, which I think was important. And that allowed for me to give it a confidence check. Another study showed that comparative blood glucose measurements were taken alongside the sensors on different days. And I think that's also important that this happens throughout the wear time of the sensor, not particularly just in the beginning time of the wear sensor, that these blood glucose measurement checks are happening throughout the study. So for me, that gave another tick on the confidence check. Going on to number 4, how many data points were in the low and high blood glucose range? As Stefan was talking about a bit earlier, it's really important to measure your blood glucose, not just on the straight and narrow when you're having a perfect sugar day, blood glucose day, but also on the days when you're experiencing a lot of volatility. So here, your checks are for low and high. In the low range, you want at least you want above 8% of readings of a glucose level at 4.4 mmol or 80 mg DL. And then on the high glucose front, you want at least more than 6% of the readings at a glucose level above 16.7 mmol or 300 mg. So if the one study I looked at on the bottom left-hand side, only 4.69% of the readings were in the low range. So if you look at that, that would kind of flag a little response for me, because we want readings to be higher than 8%. So this one had a very low range of low glucose readings. And then on the right-hand side, 14.31% of the readings were in the high range. So that is not the 5% reading specified in the query. It's higher than that 5%. So that would give me a wonderful tick in terms of confidence. Next slide, please. Then just in terms of question number 5, we're looking at meal and insulin challenges. So did the sensor test rapid rates of glucose change by introducing insulin and glucose challenges, for example, introducing a high carb meal or a correction dose during the study? So on the left-hand side, I looked at a study where supervised glucose manipulation did happen during in-clinic sessions throughout the sensor wear period. And then on the right-hand side, the provided sources did not indicate whether there was introduction of insulin or glucose challenges. So again, when these things don't come up, I think it's really important that we know that we have a right to ask manufacturers for more information when it comes to the studies presented. Next question, slide. Okay, so the last slide is around whether the study is published in a peer-reviewed journal. If you look at the bottom there, peer-reviewed journal is a publication in which articles are evaluated by independent experts before being accepted for publication. So these reviewers assess the scientific quality, validity of methods, and the significance of the findings. Such journals often include original research, and they are considered high-quality sources because of the vetting process that they have to go through. So most of the studies that I put through the test while I was going through these 6 questions, just to try and understand it from my standpoint, most of the studies mentioned in the sources were published in peer-reviewed journals, which gave me the confidence checked. There was one particular device that only had a clinical investigation report, which appears to be a company-sponsored internal report. So that for me raised a little bit of a red flag, and I think that's where I would then want to ask the manufacturer for more advice or information in terms of studies. Thank you.
Incredible. Thanks, Kirsten, for that wonderful overview of the fact sheet. And just for the people, so we have actually posted the link to the PDF, the fact sheet that you can download into the YouTube chat. So you can access that from there as well. So now this is a nice segue into our final segment, which is a panel discussion, which will be moderated by Kathy Haldane, who is our head of the NCD program at FIND. So Kathy will guide our panel through some of the key questions on the clinical, technical, and policy relevance of CGM accuracy. In addition to the speakers whom you have already heard, I'm pleased to introduce another distinguished panelist joining us today, Dr. Zahir Bayat. who is the head of Department of Internal Medicine at Gauteng, South Africa. He's a specialist physician, endocrinologist working in Gauteng. He is the head of Department of Internal Medicine at Helen Joseph Hospital, a tertiary academic hospital attached to the University of Witwatersrand. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Johannesburg, South Africa. He is also a clinician in private practice at the Center for Integrative Health based in the Santon Mediclinic and the Ahmed Katrada Private Hospital. He's also a director at the Lenasia Clinical Trial Center. Dr. Bayat is the past chairperson of the Society for Endocrinology, Metabolism and Diabetes South Africa, SEMSA, and was also part of the International Congress for Endocrinology Organizing Committee in 2018. He is a contributor and part of the editorial panel of the South African Type 2 Diabetes Guidelines, as well as the South African Thyroid Guidelines. He's well known locally and internationally, having been an invited speaker and chair to the World Internal Medicine Congress in 2018, International Congress of Endocrinology 2018, ESD Symposium in 2018 and 2017, as well as having been part of the diabetes education program in sub-Saharan Africa. He's an invited reviewer to multiple national internal medicine and endocrinology journals. In addition to all of that, Dr. Bayat sits on several regional and national drug advisory boards, as well as diabetes and thyroid advisory panels. Welcome, Dr. Bayat. I'll hand it over to Kathy. We look forward to hearing insights in this discussion.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. It's wonderful to have this panel. We're very grateful for all of your time and expertise. And I'm going to kickstart with just to get some reflections from our clinicians on the panel. And I think, how do you currently evaluate whether a CGM is good enough for your patients? And what gaps do you see in how performance is communicated to you? Dr. Bayat, do you want to come in on that?
Thanks very much, Kathy. I think a lot of what has already been said in Stefan's talk applies to clinical practice as well. You can't just look at or rely on a provider coming and say, here's our new CGM, I'm leaving you 2 samples, please test it out and see if you're happy to start prescribing it. So as a clinician, given all the difficulties we have with devices coming in that are cheaper, who have not been tested, it makes it quite difficult. So from a personal point of view, the first thing I will look at is I will look at the MAD. That's what we have available. And exactly what was suggested by Kirsten, where was the data published? Is it available for scrutiny, etc.? Before using it in any of my patients, I will actually contact the manufacturer for a bit more information. Tell me more about your studies. Can I have access to some of them? I will interrogate them on my personal time. And then finally, I would actually put that CGM on myself and run it for a period of 2 weeks to make sure that I'm actually happy and comfortable with not only the CGM, but also the interface and how data is given to my patient before I actually start using that device. It sounds laborious and it sounds difficult, but once you do it for a few devices, you begin to understand the process. And finally, feedback from your patients are important. And I think for me, the most important is from my patient. If the patient comes back and tells me, listen, I am having problems with X, Y, and Z device, I'm going to have to take it seriously. Too often we think we know much more without realizing that person living with diabetes has lived with the condition their entire life and are now quite sensitive to small changes in their glucose. So that would be my approach.
Dr. Bayat, thank you so much. So indeed, I think even taking it very personally and trying these technologies yourself. Dr. Gaman, what would you like to add further on that as a clinician, managing your patients and determining whether a CGM is good enough?
I think as Zahir mentioned, I think we have a challenge, to be honest, in that we have limited data, and I find it difficult to look at the CGM and say, this would work for you, because I have tried several and I've had challenges with consistency. So there are factors, I mean, as he mentioned, the data, but I think I feel that there is a challenge, Kathy, and everyone, that at the moment, the data out there doesn't really encourage us to pick up a CGM and use it there's limited data in terms of clinical trials, independent studies, or even real world data. So you try and look at what you have, but it's really a challenge to say that I give a patient and a CGMS. I'm talking especially not about the 3 or 4 standard well-known CGMs. We're talking about reality here in our setup, where costs are a big problem. And I think this is a really, really big topic and a big challenge, that we don't have good data out there. We have had challenges with CGMs lasting a few days, ink drifts, after 7 days or 6 days. So I really see it as a challenge when you move away from the mainstream players.
Kathy, can I just add? There's
Absolutely.
one thing that we don't always plan for. You can do all the research in your law, and sometimes reality hits you in the face. And I'll give you a little simple example. With the heat wave we've had now and the humidity that's going around, we never accounted for that, and now CGMs are falling off because people are, we just never accounted for it with any of our insight to think we're going to suddenly be exposed to 40-degree temperatures in certain areas with 80% humidity. Those things we cannot, we can try our best, but as government says, sometimes, your best may not be enough.
Wow. So perhaps I'm going to bring Stefan in on that, because I think it's something very relevant in terms of the IFCC working group, and whether this sort of aspect in terms of the usability of CGMs in these kind of settings, like high humidity, different environments, is that also being considered as being harmonized, or how do we standardize for that?
So from the IFCC working group on CGM, we think that it's best to have studies in the population or in the market where you want to sell your CGM device. Of course, it's not really feasible to ask manufacturers to do their studies multiple times across the world, but I think, or in my personal opinion, I believe that manufacturers should test should test their CGM systems in studies in the markets where they want to sell them, at least in a little pilot trial, just to supplement the data if they do not have that already on file.
Great, thank you for that. And I think particularly maybe relevant for CGM manufacturers that are joining this webinar is, how should manufacturers better communicate accuracy data so that both providers and people living with diabetes can make informed choices? Kirsten, will you come in on that?
Thanks, Kathy. Especially like when I was going through these 6 questions and sourcing the data online, some companies are very transparent and have them listed on their websites, which I found very useful. I think that would be really useful from a patient perspective and from an HCP's perspective, that these are available on local websites. A lot of the time, there were just many different studies happening, and I was like, I had no idea which one to select, which one was right, and so many of them can contradict each other, so it becomes very overwhelming. So I think if the device manufacturer companies, they all have a protocol in terms of support and training when it comes to new people using their devices, I think this really should be part of that training and support, that this information is provided. It could be information overload for a lot of patients, but I think it really should be standard that this information is provided. And then again, if patients come forward, or doctors or funders come forward asking for particular information or more information, if it's not clear in the studies that were provided, I really think that there really needs to be patience with that and transparency when it comes to answering the shortfalls in those studies.
Thanks, Kirsten. Dr. Gaman, from a healthcare professional perspective, how would you prefer to see this accuracy communication to you?
I think if for example, there is data coming up, and I think it was kind of mentioned, data with the extremes, hyperglycemia, hypoglycemia. If there is data apart from just MARD saying that, there's data in the low range and upper ranges, I think that would help me feel a bit more confident and comfortable in using this. And this, unfortunately, you may not see it in the most of the other providers that are there. They just talk about an MARD and that's it.
Mm. Dr. Bayat, anything further to add on that?
I think, like Kirsten pointed out, it's going to be extremely difficult to choose of it. And Stefan showed this beautiful bar graph looking at a single device and the different MARDs that was obtained over different studies. So really, it's hard for manufacturers, which one do I actually show my clinicians? But I think for me, the most important thing is you've got to be honest and upfront. These are the studies, and this is what we've done. To be dishonest, once you have a cycle of dishonesty going on, it becomes very hard to trust you, forgetting your device. We're just not going to go there. And Kirsten pointed out, we had the situation in South Africa. Device company was flagging it, throwing it everywhere on the internet. You could buy it yourself. You didn't need a prescription. And the MARD watch they discussed with us was nowhere close to what was actually researched. So I think honesty as a manufacturer is hugely paramount. And the second part for me would be then transparency. Government pointed it out. The 11 points from the ICGM is probably the way to go. Is my device working with a certain degree of accuracy at a low sugar, which is much more important to prevent immediate morbidity, than normal sugar and then a high sugar? So I think honesty and transparency, and then accessibility to that. So if I have a question, your medical science liaison officer needs to be available to come and meet with me and discuss it with me, and not send me on this goose chase to try and get an answer.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to shift now to hearing from our audience. And we have prepared some questions, some reflections from what has been shared today in the webinar, as well as the CGM fact sheet through a Mentimeter. So if we could move to that, we would really appreciate your feedback on some aspects that we've presented. So there's the QR code and the pin. The first question that we'd love to get the feedback from the team is, how likely are you to use the CGM performance fact sheet in your practice if you're a healthcare provider, or decision making as a person living with diabetes? And you'll have some options: never, unlikely, neutral, likely, or most likely. I'm not seeing the Menti yet on my screen. Okay, there we go, coming up now. Thank you so much. And I just to remind everybody that there is the link in the chat to the fact sheet for you to download it. It is on FINE's website, and we have provided that for you. So it seems like vast majority of respondents will use the performance fact sheet, see it as valuable in the decision making. Great. I'll move to the next question. And the next question on Menti is, which essential topic from the fact sheet do you think will be most useful when evaluating CGM accuracy? So which one for you is probably the one that you'll go to first when you have been provided with data to assess? So is it the study population, the number of participants in the study, the sensor wear time and comparator measurements, glucose data distribution, the meal and insulin challenges, or the study publication or peer review? I'm also conscious there's a little bit of a lag, so we may not be seeing the next Menti question. Okay, So while we are setting up the Menti, we've had some wonderful questions shared in the chat. And please do keep the questions coming for our experts. So the first question from Michael Brown at the CDE is, what is the recommended sample size of users to test a CGM system for safety and accuracy? Stefan, I'm going to ask you to come in on that.
Thank you. So manufacturers, when they do their studies, they should always do a formal sample size calculation. Whatever that number is at least from a statistical point of view, then good enough to show the accuracy. But for me personally, I would expect a manufacturer to enroll at least 50 to 60 participants, just also to make sure that there's some coverage of, for example, production quality differences in the CGM sensors with very small sample sizes that can be an issue otherwise. Usually these pivotal studies enroll 100 participants or even more. So that's the one hand. On the one hand, the manufacturer-initiated studies, at least 50 to 60, and then with a high enough share of insulin-treated people with diabetes. On the other hand, if you look at independent studies, as I said earlier, oftentimes the funding for these studies is limited, and doing a lot of participants in that study is one of the major drivers of the cost. So if an independent study is a bit smaller, that's also fine. I would recommend still that ideally 30 people should be enrolled for the study to be reliable.
Great. Thanks, Stefan. So indeed, in terms of whether it's manufacturer-sponsored or independent, you've provided some recommendations on the sample size there that I hope has answered Michael's question. It seems like we've got our Menti back, so I'm going to shift back to our Menti. So here is the question to everybody. Which essential topic from the fact sheet do you think will be most useful when evaluating CGM accuracy? So the CGM fact sheet, based from the input from the experts, has recommended these 6 key aspects to consider when you have been provided with data. Which for you is the most useful? The study publication or peer review, the glucose data distribution. And I really appreciated, Kirsten, how you looked at that, right? It can be quite overwhelming when you're looking at studies with all the numbers and percentages to actually assess this. So the number of participants in the study population. Interesting, the sensor wear time and comparator measurements. There's no one yet that has really picked up on that. And yet I think from Stefan, from your presentation, this is a key aspect as well to consider, right? In terms of that, the performance of the sensor throughout the entire wear time. And of course, that comparator measurement is often where those discrepancies and those gaps come in. I'm going to move on to the next question. Thank you so much for your feedback on that. We obviously would love to improve and to really meet the needs relating to the fact sheet. This is the first version. Which additional feature or features would increase your likelihood of using the fact sheets in your work? And you can rank the order. So would it be to have more visual summaries or infographics, case studies or real world examples, device comparison side by side, translations into other languages? So what additional features would increase your likelihood of using the fact sheet? Again, we really appreciate your feedback on this. Yeah, so the device comparison side by side, case studies, real world examples. And I think the example of the humidity and the sensors being able to last from Dr. Bart is a very real one in our context as well. More visual summaries, infographics. It is very copy intensive. I realized when we were designing it, we did identify that. So how can we make it less copy intensive and more usable? So we'll definitely look more into that. And our last question to you is, what is the most valuable insight you are taking away from this webinar? And we haven't finished yet. We've still got some more questions from you that we'll post to our experts. But just to hear from you, what is the most valuable insight you are taking away from this webinar? The fact sheets. Well, that's great feedback, that it is valuable. So I think the team behind the development of this, well done and thank you. Oh, wow. Okay. Great. We'll take that it's been a very useful tool. Okay. So while the responses are coming through on that, I am going to ask another question that was posed in the chat. It's another technical question, Stefan. So this is for you from Zana Bova. Where recently YSI has phased out the old blood glucose analyzer, and currently they do not have an NIST certified instrument that would replace the old model. Are there acceptable alternatives to YSI?
Basically, yes. So depending on where you want to or where you live in the United States, for example, the selection of comparator methods is a bit restricted. But for example, in Europe, any glucose analyzer that has a CE mark can be used, and I think in other jurisdictions it will be similar. You need to have a glucose analyzer that is sufficiently accurate and that is basically legal to use wherever the study is conducted. Specifically for the United States manufacturers, from what I heard from conferences that I visit and publications that I read, there are two major devices that are discussed. The one is the Nova Primary. It's from Nova Biomedical. It has a very similar measurement principle as the old YSI had. And then there is, I think, from Radiometer, the ABL 90 Flex. It's a blood gas analyzer that is also or has also been used already in studies conducted in the United States by these by the big three CGM manufacturers. So there are acceptable alternatives. I don't say that you need to use one of the two devices. Depending on where the study is conducted, any glucose analyzer can work as long as it's good enough.
Thanks, Stefan. And I think that's also asked another question from Michael around what comparator is now recommended. So I think you've addressed both of those questions. Another question is also from Michael. It seems in the confidence check that people with type 1 and type 2 on insulin may be regarded together. Is this correct? Such people are different in terms of insulin sensitivity. So I'm going to ask our clinicians to come in on this question.
I think trust Michael to give us a hard question. There's inherent differences, not just between type 1s and type 2 diabetics in terms of insulin sensitivity, but also in terms of people with type 1s individually are different to each other. And there's a whole lot of things that will actually contribute to that, not just your sensitivity index, your body surface area, your body, your weight. There's a whole lot of issues. But I think for the understanding of using the metric of glucose as a monitor, we can use them together because we're not looking at the sensitivity of the insulin here. What we're actually trying to evaluate is where the glucose level is, and can I actually use that glucose level to make a judgment call on management. So that's where the difference comes in, right? So if I can actually trust that glucose level which the CGM device is giving me, because based on your patient's personal insulin sensitivity, the amount of insulin given to correct that sugar will vary. So really, I think for the purpose of research, and we can put them together in terms of what we're trying to achieve, we're trying to achieve a best scenario to trust the glucose level which is presented to us.
Thanks, Dr. Bayat. Dr. Gaman, do you want to add anything further on that in terms of the distinction between type 1 and type 2 on insulin?
No, I think Zahir brought it out very well. I think I have nothing further to add.
Okay. I think it may be, once again, also a question from Michael on should people with type 2 diabetes be on full insulin replacement rather than basal supplementation or basal plus regimes? The concept of insulin dependent is no longer regarded as optimal. So it's possibly more in terms of the language that has been described. But Stefan, in terms of the fact sheet, we're really looking at people type 1, type 2 diabetes on insulin. And would on insulin in the context of type 2 diabetes be full insulin supplementation, or how better should we describe that in the fact sheet?
So our experience from our studies with people with type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes, when you want to achieve these rapid glucose rates of change and the high and low values, then the people with type 2 diabetes should be on multiple daily injections or insulin pump therapy. If you have different insulin regimes like basal supplementation as well in that study, then that information should be disclosed in the publication or the report that the manufacturer provides to you.
Great. Thank you for that specific response. I don't see that we have any other questions coming through in our chat, but thank you for those members or participants who asked questions. And it does seem that the fact sheet has been the most valuable insight you are taking away from this webinar, but indeed understanding CGM better, that CGMs are not equal and that standards are in process. So Stefan, if there's any way that you can accelerate the time frame of the ISO, let's see if you can make it happen.
Unfortunately, I'm not able to, but you might be, and people in advocacy groups and the clinicians, if they can convince their regulators wherever they live that standardization is required and what level of standardization should be achieved, then we will be much faster than only relying on ISO.
Wonderful. So I'm looking at our colleagues here, our clinician colleagues and our advocacy collegues will definitely take that up, I think. And already I think there's a lot of that conversation happening in the markets. So I'm going to hand over back to Priyanka, and just to thank so much my panelists for your engagement, and of course the viewers as well.
Indeed. Thank you so much for that insightful discussion and those thought-provoking insights. And it was wonderful to learn that, the guidelines are going to come and we will be waiting for them. And the important aspect of adding usability as well, to test these in those conditions where, which could be more challenging to use these devices. On your screen, you can see that you can scan the QR code and find the fact sheet, the downloadable fact sheet in PDF that you can use and use it in your workplace. Tell us about it. Tell us if you use it, how you use it. And if you have any feedback regarding it, you can always reach out to NCD's team at FIND here. So on behalf of FIND, I would like to first thank you to all the panelists, Dr. Stefan, Kirsten, Dr. Gaman, and Dr. Zahir. It was wonderful to have you, to listen to you, to learn the diverse perspectives, which are so important, the importance of collaboration and bringing all the experts together in this. And I think we can do this. And thank you, a very special thank you to all the audience, to all the people who joined us today. And this will be available on YouTube subsequently as well. And so if you want to go back and go through them again, then you're most welcome to do so. Thank you so much for participating today. And from FIND, wishing you all a wonderful rest of the day and a wonderful weekend.